Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Running Tales podcast, where we attempt to tell the stories of ordinary people who've done extraordinary things in the worlds of running, race walking and wheelchair racing. I'm Craig Lewis, and in this week's episode you can hear me speaking to Denny Krahe. Denny is a qualified athletic trainer and running coach, as well as being an ultra runner himself. He also works to eliminate and prevent common injuries that plague runners. So listen out for some top tips on how to improve your running while staying injury-free. However, I met Denny as we've got something in common. Yes, Denny is a running podcaster. His podcast, Diz Runs, revolves around the idea that every runner has a story and it's great to talk about them. Sound familiar? Well, yeah, but I can't really complain. Denny's already made more than 1,000 episodes. He's well into his podcasting journey. You can listen to his pod at dizruns.com. As soon as you finish this one, of course. When you do, be sure to listen to yesterday's episodes, where you might just hear some familiar voices. Yes, Michelle and I took to the other side of the microphone to be quizzed by Denny about our running journeys. But back to this podcast and Denny's story. I started off by asking him if running was something he got into at school.
Definitely not. I played a lot of sports as a kid, soccer or football, depending on which side of the pond you're on, and then American football or football, depending on which side of the pond you're on. Basketball, baseball, I grew up in a small town, and pretty much whatever season the sport was in session, like that was just kind of what I played all the way from, 5, 6 years old, all the way up into I guess into about high school. And never really enjoyed running. Running was always part of the sports, and throw a ball out on the field and I'll chase it around all day. But when we had to do the warm up runs or the punishment runs or whatever it was, I definitely hated running. And I remember in high school, a couple of buddies of mine asked if I wanted to join the track team. Hey, you want to go out for track? I said, no, what is the point of track? Like, the worst part of every sport is the running. And now we're going to join a sport where all we do is running. So I was very, not much of a runner as a kid. Ran a little bit in college just to try to, stay in shape and something to do, kind of still be a little bit active once in a while. But actually when I was in graduate school, I was a certified athletic trainer or kind of sports physio, working with the track and cross country team at a kind of a mid-major university here in the States. And I would just be at the track every day for 3-4 hours for practice, stretching and taping and rehabs and kind of whatever injury related issues that we were hopefully not having to deal with, but whatever the athletes had that they were dealing with. And towards the end of practice, they'd be kind of sitting around doing a little bit of stretching, whatever. And I would be so bored that I was like, well, I'll just run a couple laps just to help pass the time. And then I started doing that. We'd go to away meets and I'd have these big gaps in between when my athletes were competing and I had nothing to do. So I'd go kind of run around the college campuses or town or whatever it was. And that was probably like 2007, 2008. And that was when it kind of started to click. I don't know that I was really like seriously a runner at that point, but at least I didn't hate it anymore. It was something that I did enjoy a little bit. And then, that kind of got me started. And then 4 or 5 years later, I guess is really when it hit full speed and haven't stopped since.
I don't know if you find this with people you speak to in running community as well, but that kind of story is so familiar with people who are into running now, is that at school, they weren't into it. They might have played other sports, but really running was a very secondary thing that they kind of get into down the line.
Yeah, every once in a while, there's somebody that started running and when they were 10 and just haven't ever stopped. But yeah, a lot of times it is folks that somewhere 20s or 30s, they stumbled their way in somehow and found that they enjoyed it, and sometimes found that they're actually maybe have a little bit of skill at it and some really can push themselves really far. But whether they're pushing for fast times or just out there for the community base or a little bit of both, something about being an adult and finding running is ticks the right box for a lot of people.
Yeah. So what was it for you in the end that got you into running? Because we're assuming that you do love running now.
Yeah, I definitely do. And I think that at the beginning, it was like I said, it was just something to kill the time. but now it's a little bit more of it, and maybe even, probably in the 2012, 2013, it was able to scratch that little bit of competitive itch. Like I said, growing up playing team sports, like it's a lot harder to get 20 guys together to go play whatever pickup game of football or soccer or basketball or whatever. But you can just put on your shoes and head out the door and go run. And also, and again, to get that competitiveness towards it, it's like, not that I don't run hard all the time. I don't run hard very often at all. I'm very much of a heart rate training kind of guy, but to measure progress over time, to see that I'm able to be running faster at the same level of heart rate, to see race times line up over the course of years and hopefully see some progress there. I think there's that little bit of still want to be athlete in me, as far as competitiveness. And I'm not competing to win. I'm not at the front of the race. I'm not on the podium, but being able to compete with myself and push myself, and strive for some of those goals on an athletic front, I think is really probably at the root for me, the biggest thing.
So in terms of your own running, what sort of running have you done? Well, now and also over the years, are you a half marathon man, a marathon man? Do you love getting out and doing ultras?
Yeah, like probably longer-ish, the better. I'm not one of the super crazy ultra people. The longest ultra I've done is 45 miles. I've done a 5 or 6 50Ks, and then mostly probably about 15 or 20 marathons. So I'll dip my toes in the half marathon once in a while for sure, and maybe a 10K. I really don't like the 5K. It's just too hard and too fast, and there's no time to kind of ease into it. You just got to be ready to go from the time the gun starts to the time you cross the finish line. But yeah, probably the marathon right now is my sweet spot. But I do kind of feel myself getting pulled a little bit more towards 50K and probably eventually 50 miles. And I don't know how far that rabbit hole might lead for me. I don't have any desire to dip up into the 100-mile territory right now, but I do have a little bit of an intrigue of maybe thinking about 100K, which a couple of years ago I would have said no. So who knows? We'll see what the next years hold. But right now, kind of that marathon to 50K to maybe 50 miles is kind of my zone.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating with how some runners will kind of say that. I know 1 or 2 ultra runners who've even passed over like the marathon distance. And speaking to a chap called Simon Hollis last week, who's telling me how he's done like the marathon to start, but he's never actually done a marathon. That's crazy. And I not maybe not intentionally, but I kind of did similar. Like I ran my first marathon before I'd ever run any race longer than a 10K. So I kind of skipped over the half marathon and some of those intermediate distances, and I'd only run like 1 10K. So I had no idea what I was getting myself into, woefully ill prepared, and not the way that I would encourage folks to do it. But if you know what you're doing and you just never run a marathon for one reason or another, but you've just jumped into ultras, that's okay if it's intentional. Mine was completely accidental and not to be emulated if possible. Yeah, well, actually, I remember someone telling me that their first ultra they set out to do, I think. Now I'm going to have to get this right, but they set out to do a half marathon or some sort of. It must have been something longer than that. But they were running with somebody, got halfway around, and that person said, it was a family member, said, "I'm enjoying this so much running with you. Will you just do the second half?" And they ended up running an ultra.
That's not the surprise that I would want. I don't think, when I thought I was at the finish line and find out I'm just halfway through at that point.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they were kind of saying, that it was really funny to sort of find out that they had to do exactly the same distance again after getting that far around it. With ultras, is it the getting out in nature? Is it the physical challenge to yourself? What makes you want to run an ultra?
It is the nature part a little bit. It's getting out on the trails and like I typically run mostly roads in my day to day. So kind of getting on the trail is a different experience. It's just kind of a treat when I'm able to do it once in a while. And so having 4 or 5, well, probably not 4, probably 5.5, 6, 7 hours, depending on the terrain and the distance and whatnot out there on the trails is kind of nice. And I think, and this kind of goes against my competitive answer that I gave earlier, that it still is something that drives me, but the trail is just relaxing to me. Like an ultra, I guess, is just relaxing in that, like, I'm not out there trying to run, some blazing fast. I'm not out there trying to set course records. I probably go into it, most all the ultras I've gone into, like with a plan to, walk every 5 minutes or walk every mile or whatever it is. So like I'm run walking kind of from the start usually. Maybe it's a little bit longer, maybe it's every 5K, but whatever it is, like there's usually a strategy. Like I'm kind of pacing myself, and it's more of kind of just exploring the longer ends of endurance and just being out there for that amount of time. So while I enjoy pushing myself for a road marathon, I kind of just enjoy the relaxed nature and knowing that I'll be out there for 6-7 hours. And, you roll into an aid station at an ultra and you got sandwiches and you've got cookies and you've got crackers and like you got food to eat, as opposed to rolling through it at a marathon or road marathon where it's like they hand you a gel and you're like, what? I don't do gels. So it's like, I don't really want that. But like, at the ultra, you can always find something to eat and chat for a few minutes and then get on your way. So I think it's the atmosphere of the ultras that really pulls me into that distance. And just because it's so different. I mean, it's running, and if you're 50K, it's not that much longer than a road marathon. But it's like two completely different sports if you kind of look at the atmosphere and what the setting can be like.
Definitely. I've spoken to a few ultra runners. I've not done an ultra myself, but it's very much that. Obviously, some people will walk in a marathon, but with most people, it's get to an aid station and chuck some water over your head or whatever, and you carried on. It's a very different thing in the ultra, and suddenly you're allowed and almost encouraged to walk parts of it. So it becomes this, like you say, I love the idea of it being a completely different sport, really.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, the 45 mile I ran was just about a year ago as we're recording this, and there was one of the aid stations, the guy that was working the aid station had brought his dog with him. And so like it was like a 5-looped course. So every time I went by, I stopped like legitimately for like 3 or 4 minutes and played with the dog every time. Like I wouldn't do that on a road marathon. Like I'd be too worried about my time. And like, I'm giving away 5 minutes a lap, and that's you do the math, and that's 20-25 minutes, something like that. But like, I didn't care. Like I was playing with the dog in the woods. Like that's a good way to spend a day as far as I'm concerned.
100%, yeah. And just going back to the marathons, you mentioned sort of marathons as your distance at the moment, and you've obviously done quite a few. What are kind of your favourite marathons that you've done, and also just to give people an idea, what sort of times are you clocking on the marathon?
Yeah, so I think my last marathon PR was just before kind of everything shut down with COVID times. And I'd just gotten under 4 hours for the first time, like 3:58, something like that. So decent, but certainly not, again, I'm not out at the front of the pack. I'm kind of solid mid-packer typically. And I have a goal, I guess. I do have a goal of running a marathon in every state here in the US. So I haven't revisited a lot of marathons. I've tried to bounce it as much as I can, because travel is obviously a big part of that piece of that puzzle as well. But so I've run some races in I think 11 states now. So I'm still in the early-ish stages, but a decent chunk of the way, about 20% of the way through. But the race that I have run the most is the Walt Disney World Marathon. We actually just moved, but we used to live 30 miles, 40 miles from Walt Disney World. So it was a nice, and I've always been a Disney fan. So it was a nice race it was local. It was fun. So I've run that one probably 5 or 6 times. And it's just, I used to try to race it. And the last time I ran it, I just ran to every place where they had characters. Because if you're not familiar with it, they have multiple spots where Disney characters are dressed up and they're out on the courses, and you run through the parks and things like that. So I would just run from the starting line to the first character and take my picture with whoever it was, or with Mickey Mouse, and then run to the next one and get my picture with Minnie Mouse, and just continue along for there's probably 30 stops over the course of the 26 miles. And that was just a fun race. But that's the race I've done the most.
I'm picking up a theme here of running to aid stations and spending time with either real or otherwise animals.
Yeah, I guess you can tell that like that was this last marathon that I did at Disney a couple of years ago, which actually that was 2020, so it was right before the pandemic really got going. I was well enough into my ultra running career at that point that like the idea of just stopping and starting wasn't foreign to me like it was the first couple of times I ran Disney, where it was just head down, just barreling through. Because it was a race and I had to run as fast as I could. And now it was a race, but that was a fun race. So we'll stop and have a good time.
And I know the other part of what you do with running is carrying on that carrying on that kind of helping people with injuries and so on, and B, you're a coach, aren't you? What's it like to help other people through their running journeys?
Oh man, that's the best. That's the best. It's I like, it's kind of hard to put into words, or maybe not hard to put into words, but it doesn't always make sense. But like, I get more excited about one of the people I'm coaching hitting their goals than I do about myself. Like at this point, I still have goals. I want to qualify for the Boston Marathon, and I still have a long way to go to get there. I kind of joke, but it's also serious. I need to get older and faster, and kind of eventually, like I'll get to that point when I'm 45, maybe when I'm 50, that maybe I can get into that right range of qualifying. But, I go out and have a good race. Like, that's great. But one of the folks I'm coaching goes out and has a good race. And like, I'm so excited. I'll be, on a busy race week, and I'll have 3 or 4 or 5, 6 people that I'm tracking on my phone at the different races that they're running across the country. And, just tracking their splits and what they're, depending on what the race has available of tracking athletes. So I'm paying attention or getting text messages or whatever it is. And just, I'll be eating lunch with my family, and all of a sudden, like, yeah, and oh, you must have somebody racing today. It's like, yep, just got the alert that we hit the mark or had a good day or whatever. So I love it. And I don't know that I would have ever been able to plan or thought. I guess I've been doing this for 6-7 years now, but 10-15 years ago that this would be my job. But I kind of stumbled into it, and it's kind of become something that I really enjoy, and glad that the twists and turns of life brought me this way.
And I guess this is going to be a fairly broad question, because it probably depends on what you're coaching somebody to, what length or what kind of event you're coaching somebody to do. But do you have some top tips for people who are looking to either get into running or further their running career? And also, I guess I'm really interested in the sort of injury avoidance thing, because I know that's something that you're really expert at.
Yeah. Well, my biggest tip, and this wasn't something that I've always held. I mean, it's been for a while now. It's been probably six years that I've really been onto this train. But I mentioned earlier that I'm into heart rate training, and I don't force anybody to do heart rate training, but I definitely am pretty stickler on keeping your easy runs easy. And I know for years that I was, I would go out there, and every run, maybe I wasn't trying to push as hard as possible, but I was, I wanted to be out of breath, and I wanted to be panting. I wanted to feel like I was really working hard. And the more I've learned and studied on just kind of the physiology and the science and kind of building the aerobic system, which, if you're running really anything longer than maybe 400 meters, but certainly anything longer than 800 meters. And the folks that I'm coaching with are running half marathons and marathons. So we're talking, hours, couple hours at least typically out there. That's aerobic. Building your aerobic system is huge. And so I'm always kind of needling folks to slow down a little bit, run easier. Don't worry about the pace on Strava today. And is it faster than everybody else? Or did you get a new PR on this segment or whatever? Like we're trying to build fitness, yes, for the next race, but also for next year and 3 years from now and 5 years from now. And that progression in my mind is all about slow and steady building the aerobic system again. So running easier is kind of my top tip. Like if you're out there, and there's a time and a place to go hard. I don't want to try to say that I'm not saying run track workouts or tempo runs or pace runs or things like there's absolutely time and a place for those types of things. But if the bulk of your training is kind of feels relatively easy, kind of in that feel like you could kind of go all day, you can certainly have a conversation type of pace. That's probably doing as much for your fitness and your growth towards your training goals as anything. And also, oh, by the way, that also helps to reduce the injury risk. It's not, guaranteed that you won't ever get injured if you're running easy and a little bit slower, but you're pushing hard, you're pushing the pace, you're putting more stress and wear and tear on your body. And especially if you're doing that all the time with every run, then it impacts your recovery. It impacts your performance, and it also definitely increases your risk of being injured if you're always going hard. So, it's not a silver bullet by any stretch, and it's not always fun because, again, it's like you're running slower. It doesn't maybe look as flashy on social media and whatnot. But for long-term growth and long-term success and long-term, hopefully staying healthy in our sport, I think that running easy most of the time or easier most of the time is maybe the most important thing that you can do. And it's changed my running, definitely. And it's the folks I've been working with for years that have really bought into it, like light years from where we started. But it's slow. You're not gonna notice it in a week. You're not gonna notice the difference it makes in a month. But if you start looking back a year or 2 years, and it's like, wow, how did I go from X to Y? And it's just a little bit every day, slow and steady.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. And I kind of wish somebody had told me that 4 or 5 years ago, because I think I kind of discovered that myself by accident almost. I used to go out, like you said, every run would be, I wasn't doing huge distances, but I'd go out and blast it, 5K, 10K, maybe a bit longer sometimes. And after 2-3 months, I was always picking up little injuries, sore ankles, sore knees, that sort of thing. Nothing major, but it was just niggles all the time. And it wasn't until I kind of set myself a goal to run 1,000 miles over a year. And I thought, oh, do you know, if I'm going to do that, I cannot keep getting these injuries. And I just slowed right down. And I didn't pick up a single injury over the entire year, and managed to do the whole sort of goal by October. And it was that slowing down. It made such a huge difference.
Yeah, I feel like once runners have really wrapped their head around it and experienced it, seen the difference of how they feel after several months of running easier, how they feel. And oh, by the way, the performance is still there. Cause sometimes you'll get people that push back and say, well, if I'm not training hard, like how am I going to run faster on race day? And it's like, all right, well, let's do it for a couple of months, and then let's go have a race, or have a certain type of workout that you really enjoy doing. And maybe you won't be significantly faster in just a couple months, but you won't have slowed down. You won't have lost, like, oh, I'm going to lose all this. No, it's still there. It's still there. See? And like, oh yeah, it really is still there. And then they lean into it even more. And then again, eventually, 6 months, 8 months, they start to really see that. Again, I say they really start to see the progress. It's still slow and gradual, but there's progress, and they're feeling better, and there's progress. And they've been avoiding the niggles and avoiding the injuries, hopefully. And that's when the light bulb really goes on. And it's like, all right, this is something that maybe, for some of these bigger goals I have that are going to take 2, 3, 4 years to accomplish. If I can be healthy and keep chipping away at them, that makes it a lot easier, or a lot more likely to be successful than if I'm pushing hard, injured, and regress, and then push and then injured and regress. And it's hard to make a lot of progress that way over the course of years, in my experience, at least.
And how important are things like rest days and recovering properly, and I suppose also eating the right things to that training regime?
I mean, it's massively important. And I say that as a guy who will raise his hand and say that I don't always do everything that I probably should in terms of supplementing the running. I kind of joke about calling them the little things, as far as taking care of your nutrition and taking care of sleep and rest and recovery and all those types of things. But I don't know that they're that little, like I don't know what the exact percentage is, but I kind of say it's equal parts taking care of that side of the coin and your training. If you're putting all the miles in, and runners, some of us we're notorious for, burning the candle at both ends. I got to get my training in for my race. So I get up silly early in the morning, but then don't necessarily go to bed, at a relatively decent hour at night. So you're sacrificing sleep to get your training in, because we feel like we need the training. And in certain aspects, of course, we do need to get those miles in. But if you're not giving your body the recovery time, you're not giving the body the rest it needs, whether it's rest days. And I am a fan of at least one rest day per week for most folks. Maybe there's a time and a place for a short season to kind of go almost 7 days a week. But I think for me, at least, mentally as much as physically, I need that day off. I just need that day where, like, hey, like I can sleep in a little bit and not feel bad about it. I don't have to rush out the door. I can just kind of relax. And usually for me, it's Sunday mornings, but it varies a little bit from time to time. But I just think that having that little refresher day, Monday always feels better because I had Sunday off, like as far as just getting out the door and going for my run on Monday morning. And I've tried the 7 days a week thing a few times, and usually, a week or two, it's fine. But for me, I start getting into that month and a half, and I just need a day. So yeah, but all that to say, back to your question, I think taking care of our bodies outside of just the running, outside of just running easy is vitally important. And not even just for the running, although it helps there, but just for good health. Like, you want to be a good, healthy human for whatever you got going on, for your family, for your kids, for work, for whatever other obligations you have outside of the sport. And so, not being broken down, not being tired all the time, not falling asleep when you're not supposed to be, like, all those things, being healthy kind of helps with being a good runner, and vice versa. So, get to bed, get some sleep, get on the foam roller once in a while, maybe do some yoga or some stretching, or not that you have to do any one thing, but just doing some of those other things to take care of yourself will probably be helpful for you.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, listening to you talking there a little bit about sleep, it reminds me of listening to one of your podcasts recently, because we're going to get on to podcasting now. I remember you talking about sleep as one of the things that you perhaps weren't doing so well on yourself at the moment. But yeah, in terms of podcasting, what made you sort of go, okay, I'm loving running, I'm loving working with people, I want to start talking to people about this and telling everyone about it as well?
And that actually kind of started before, it definitely started before the coaching. I was kind of getting into working for myself as a personal trainer, and working with folks from not specific to running, but just kind of health and fitness type of work back in like 2012, 2013. And a friend of mine who I met at a kind of business entrepreneur networking type of thing in town said, "Hey, have you ever heard of podcasts? Like, I think you might like listening to podcasts. It's a great way to learn stuff." And that, like, it's like 2012. And I had listened to podcasts before, but they were typically like comedy stuff or, kind of morning radio, talk show radio type of thing. And this was in like 2005, 2006. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I've heard of podcasts, but that's not. He's like, no, check it out. So I, got into iTunes and realized that, yeah, there was a lot, felt like a lot then, probably not so much as compared to now. But a lot of like entrepreneur and business and kind of that type of thing. So I started just diving in, learning, and just listening to consuming content, trying to learn as I was kind of getting my feet wet as a business owner. And then I was just kind of like, hey, like this is interesting. Like maybe this could be something that could help me to grow my business as well. So I launched a podcast in 2014 about just kind of health and fitness tips and tricks and things like that. And, long story short, I ended up deciding that I was going to try to do this running podcast as well, because I was into running at that point, but I wasn't doing any work as a running coach or anything focused on that. I had a blog. It's like, I got a blog. I can use that as kind of the platform for the podcast. So on July 1st, the first episode of my running podcast, which is now my only podcast, went live. At that point, I was trying to do both of them. Kept it up for about a month, and I was like, yeah, I'm having too much fun talking to runners, so I'll just do that one. And after about a year or so, maybe not quite that long, but after about a year is when I started saying, well, maybe I could do this coaching thing, because I had people reaching out and asking, hey, do you coach? Like, it sounds like you really enjoy this stuff. Clearly, you know it. At least I guess they thought I knew a little bit about what I was talking about. So I kind of, said, no, I don't really know. And then after, the fourth or fifth or sixth person asked if I coached, I said, well, let me look into what does that look like? And I ended up not going the route of getting the traditional certifications because of all of my schooling. 4 years of undergraduate work and 2 years of grad school were all in exercise science and physiology, and kind of looked at what it would take to get one of the more common certifications here in the US. And it was like a weekend course of everything that I covered over 6 years of college and postgraduate work. So I said, well, I think I'm okay there. I think I've got enough overlap that I'm probably going to be okay. So I just said, the next person that asked, I said, yeah, I do. I'm just getting started in. I was very honest. I'm just kind of trying to figure things out. So if you want to take a chance on me, I'd love to work with you. And that kind of grew over the course of a couple of years to where that could become my full-time job. And now I guess I'm at 5 years of full-time coaching that all started because of the podcast. So it was kind of happy coincidence how that worked together.
Yeah, so give everyone a flavor of what the podcast is, what it's called. Give it a bit of a plug for people.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm happy to do that. So it's currently called Diz Runs Radio. It's like the second or third iteration of the title over the course of the last 8 years. We started in, like I said, July of 2014, and we're still going strong. And it's very similar to this, quite frankly. It's talking to folks every Monday is an interview episode with somebody. And just kind of sharing their story and kind of, how they got into running, what their goals are, races they've run, like whatever. Just kind of the idea is that it's modeled after the type of conversation you'd have with somebody if you're out on a run together. So over the course of an hour or two, not that the podcast is usually about an hour, but if you're talking to somebody for a couple hours on a run, like it's kind of, you start off with running usually, and then sometimes you get into life, and who knows where, sometimes it's family stuff and works, like who knows, but it's just kind of a conversation that goes where it goes. And that's kind of how I try to do with the interviews. And then Fridays, so I do 2 episodes a week. Mondays are the interviews, and Fridays I call them a quick tip, although it's kind of become a joke because they starting to sometimes be 25, 30 minutes instead of the original plan was like 10 or 15 minutes, but some type of coaching tip, some type of something that maybe it's something that I've struggled with and learned, or maybe it's something that one of the athletes I coach has been working with or struggling with. And so I kind of share that lesson out to the masses, but it's some type of hopefully useful bit of knowledge or insight or information that can help folks as they progress in their running journey. So Diz Runs Radio, it's 1,000 and something episodes now. And, eventually I'm sure I'll stop, but right now, no plans on slowing down anytime soon. So if you need a little more running conversation in your life, check it out. And we got Craig coming up on the show, maybe already, maybe not. I know we're going to kind of coordinate that, but we're going to turn the tables, and he's having me on Running Tales, and I'm going to have him on Diz Runs Radio here right about the same time. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, definitely. No, I'm really looking forward to doing kind of the other side of this conversation as well, and hopefully getting Michelle, my wife, who does the podcast
Yeah.
with me, because her story is much more interesting than mine. But hopefully between us, we'll give you something interesting. I know one of the things that I find doing this, and I can't believe we've done 1,000 episodes. That's unbelievable. But we find doing this, it's the stories behind people. It's not just necessarily the running. So we've spoken to people with around mental health issues, say people who've got into running because they've lost a child or lost even a baby, which is incredibly sad. But the difference that running makes to them is amazing. We've had people recovering from illness or alcoholism, and I know I listened to one of your episodes recently where you were speaking to a lady who was an amazing runner, but also you spoke a lot about eating disorders. I mean, is that something you find as a big part of what you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's not every episode doesn't always go into those types of topics, but sometimes we absolutely do. And I think that's kind of, to me, that's the life side of, like my tagline of the show is running life and everything in between. And sometimes you stay more focused on the running in the conversation, but sometimes we really do dive into some of the struggles. And I mean, it's I don't want to make it too much of a cliche, but like we all have something, we all have something that we struggle with. Sometimes it seems like it's less of a big deal. Sometimes it seems like it's more of a big deal or a bigger thing. Or sometimes somebody else is struggling. Like, God, I couldn't imagine being in that person's shoes. But we all have those things. And I think that, for whatever reason, maybe it is because we, as runners, like I said, when you're running with somebody and you're spending a couple hours together, like it just, I don't know why, but it just tends to, you get real, you get honest with each other pretty quickly. And that's tended to happen somewhat regularly on the show. And yeah, I mean, similar to you, I think, talk to folks with various stages of battling addictions or have made it through addictions or losses and the whole gamut of struggles that people have had, and people still have. And I think that somewhere in there, the conversation, hopefully it's helpful for the person that's sharing to kind of, continue to work through and process. But hopefully maybe it's also helpful for folks that are listening to also further realize that I'm not alone, and that the struggles I have, that's not great, but like, it's okay. Like I'm not alone. I'm not the only person that struggles with something, and maybe running can somehow help me to continue to work through and continue to just live as full of a life as I can, even though my struggles that I have. And again, I mean, we all have them to varying degrees. So I think it kind of helps. Hopefully it helps at least to balance or at least to humanize everybody. It's not just, not just everybody's life is perfect, because that's what I see on social media, but you get talking and it's like, oh yeah, like everybody's got some struggles too.
Yeah, definitely. I certainly find that, and I think it's really interesting to be able to talk through things on a wider thing, I suppose. Well, why do you think this thing this thing in running that we all so many of us hated at school and didn't want to do ends up being such a fantastic thing that makes such a huge difference to so many people's lives, sometimes on a huge level?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm an introvert, like a massive introvert, but put me around a bunch of people running, and like I'm cool. I'm right at home. And so I don't know if it's something with the just the community, like the people needing other people, being social creatures, even though I don't feel like I'm very social in most environments. Again, put me with a bunch of runners or talking to runners one-on-one or whatever, and I'm good to go. So I think there's a little bit of that community aspect that comes back. And again, maybe, to a certain extent, like myself, played team sports as a kid, and I'm not playing team sports as an adult, and running isn't necessarily a team sport, but it can be an individual sport with other people. So you kind of get that little bit of teamwork. If you're doing a long run with a friend or two, I have had many long runs where I wasn't feeling great, but my running partner was going right along. So like, I'm going to keep going. And then there's been several runs where I was feeling pretty good and she was struggling. And so like I was able to help her go. So there's a little bit of that teamwork that goes along with that, the camaraderie. And of course there's the endorphins, there's just the way you feel after a run. There's been many mornings I don't necessarily want to go for a run, but I know I'm going to be happy after I finish. So there's some of that it kind of rewards itself, or it's self-fulfilling, of like, if I go and get it done, I'm going to feel better because of it, and the rest of my day is going to be better because of it. And so I don't know if that necessarily answers the question. I don't know why we all find our way into it and stick with it, and it becomes a somewhat of an obsession. And maybe it's multiple angles to get there. But once running gets its hold of you, once it's got its grasp on you, not too many people are looking to escape. We found a good place to be, and let's just hang out there for as long as we can.
Fantastic. No, I think that's a good way to sum it up, actually, and probably a good time to finish today's conversation. Denny, thank you so much for coming on Running Tales. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Craig, it was a pleasure. Thanks for letting me enjoy a little bit of time with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today on the Running Tales podcast. I really hope you enjoyed Denny's story. I'd absolutely encourage you to go over and listen to his podcast, Diz Runs. It's at dizruns.com. If you enjoy the fantastic stories of individual runners and some top tips as well about how to get into running, it's really a great place to go and listen to those stories. If you like what we do, please follow us on Facebook. Our page is called Running Tales, or on Twitter at Running Tales Pod. We'd also really appreciate it if you could leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple and Spotify, anywhere else. Those reviews make more people find the podcast and listen to the wonderful stories of the people we have on there. That's all for this week, and we look forward to seeing you on next week's Running Tales podcast.